Welcome to the Audiobook World Championship VCast, Episode 3. From London, John York. From Washington, D.C., Antony Shugaar. And from Portland, Becky Parker Geist.
Hello and welcome to the Audiobook Club, the place to be in order to keep updated with everything that's going on at our academy. Up-to-date reports on the ranking lists, the latest in audiobook news, and of course, interviews and conversation with very special guests. The Audiobook World Awards Academy envisions a world where the primary tools to globally promote culture and education are none other than audiobooks. Here at our academy, along with our brilliant partners, we champion and celebrate authors, audiobook studios, and the teams behind their creations. I'm John York, and co-hosting with me today is the acclaimed writer, translator, and our juror, Antony Shugaar.
Hi, it's really great to be here.
It's great to have you. We have yet another treat in store for you in this month's episode, as we're joined with author, audiobook producer, and CEO of Pro Audio Voices, Becky Parker Geist.
Johnny, it's great to be here. Thanks so much.
You're more than welcome. We would like to take this opportunity to proudly announce that Becky will be joining us as an official Academy juror. Becky, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show. How excited are you to be joining the Academy as an official juror?
Oh, I'm really excited about it. I'm excited about the whole mission of the Academy. And just to be transparent with everyone, none of the books that we have produced are entered in the competition. But what an exciting thing to be a part of. Thank you.
Fantastic stuff. We can't wait to have you. We are thrilled to welcome you, Becky, to the Our family. Now, for those of you tuning in to check on the official ranking list, we're going to be once again picking out our personal standout books, explaining our reasoning, as well as delving into how you can get involved at home very shortly. But first, Antony, I know you share my feelings in wanting to get straight into picking Becky's brain, taking a deep dive into her decades of experience producing audiobooks.
Absolutely, and I will echo Becky in saying that none of the books that I've translated are in consideration either. Becky, this sounds like such an interesting field. It must be, just a great place to work, a great space to work in. I wonder if you could kind of help walk our listeners through what the production process is. How do you go about it? Prepping the manuscript, choosing a narrator, production, post-production. Can you give us a little bit of a tour?
Yes, I can. Thank you. I'll keep it brief though, because I literally, when I'm doing presentations about this for authors, there's hours worth of material to cover. But just to give an overview of what that process is, we always start with that pre-production process. So for us, that and in general, that involves the casting process, finding the right voice for each particular project. And, there are hundreds, thousands of great narrators out there, but each one is not perfect for every project, right? So we're looking for the perfect match. And then a big part of that preparation is getting the manuscript to where it is ready for recording. What do I mean by that? There are all kinds of things that we need to pay attention to. For example, if there are any visuals, illustrations, photos, diagrams, that sort of thing in the manuscript, we need to know how we're going to handle that. And so in some cases, if the information is already included in the text, we might say, well, it makes most sense to omit it. We're often looking for the opportunities to continue the engagement between author and listener. And so an opportunity like having a visual can be a moment in which to invite the listener to the website to see the visual, because, that might be of value to them. So there are things like that. There are also front matter and back matter. You've typically, of course, we would normally include a preface, a foreword, things like that. But we wouldn't necessarily include things like those testimonial quotes at the very beginning, or the acknowledgments, whether they're at the beginning or the end, or even for acknowledgments, if we're going to include them and they're in the front, let's move them to the end, because for most listeners, we want to get right into that story. We want to get to the meat, so we're looking at things like that. And then we'll sometimes have a project where, let's say, for example, there's a very personal message from the author. It might be in the form of a preface or foreword or introduction. It might be a note at the end. And sometimes, authors may want to have their voice doing that. So there again, it's not always going to be a professional narrator who's doing a project. Sometimes it's an author doing the entire thing. Sometimes it's a combination, or it could be multiple voices. Could be a full cast. That's a kind of project that we thoroughly enjoy doing. And then also there may be things in that pre-production time or work that involves things like, let's say if there's a meditation in the audio, in the book. What a great thing to include in an audiobook, right? But maybe, we have to think about, well, is the listener driving? And if in that the case, we certainly don't want them closing their eyes and meditating, right? So we have to think about, what is that listener experience going to be like, So all these kinds of things that we're figuring out at the front end, so that once we get into production, and once we're starting to record, we're fully ready. We have our questions answered. And then that recording process, then we're moving into whoever's narrating is going to do all of that recording, prepare their audio so that they, when they send that in, it's what we call it a punch and roll. So that just basically means we're going to get one take of each part of the book. Not, something that a lot of people don't realize is you may think that recording an audiobook, you sit down and you just read the whole thing straight through. Well, if you've ever tried to do that, you'll know that that's not really feasible. There's lots of stumbling, lots of corrections that go in along the way. We say the wrong word, or we emphasize with the wrong word to change the meaning, things like that. So, of course, we're making those adjustments as we go. But then moving, further into the process, then we're talking about that post-production, where we have somebody who's listening to the audio that's been sent in, making sure that we don't have any of those, the dog barking next door, the leaf blower, the lawnmower, or the diesel trucks, things like that. But also listening for, moments where maybe a wrong word was said, or, other adjustments need to be made. Then those corrections or pickups are created, done by the narrator, and then inserted into the audio, rechecked, mastered. Mastering is all about getting those levels into the right range of volume, and that something we call a room tone. So every room has its own sound, and you want to have room tone through, in the places where there is silence, right? And then after it's all finished and the authors approved it, then off it goes into the submissions process for distribution. That's the overview.
That's fascinating. That's really great. And I can, in a way, you've just answered the question I'm about to ask, which is, what is it about the world of audiobooks that hooked you? You've given a really good description. Is there anything else that you would add to that? Because the description makes it sound so fascinating.
Yeah, I came into audiobooks through acting. That was my I got my MFA in acting, and that's what I wanted to spend my life doing, is that telling of the story, the bringing it to life. And that's what I really love. It's that process of taking a story and giving it that next level of aliveness, right? Embodying that. And and I have a real passion about that, because I really, really do believe that we are so impacted by the stories that we hear and the stories that we tell. Like, that's life, it's like we live our lives as story. And so the audiobooks that we take in, and the audio, and that we are producing, these have a significant impact on who we are as human beings. That's awesome and powerful, and a great place. Great way to be able to have a positive impact in the world.
Yeah, sounds like an incredible way to spend your days. Um, Last question, maybe not the last question, but another question is, why on the other end are audio, and a little bit you've answered it, why are audiobooks growing in popularity so remarkably and so fast? And I think you've partially answered that, but
Yeah, it's been quite an exciting and dynamic and continual rise in audiobook listeners. And some of the interesting shifts that have happened, we used to talk about how, people like to multitask. Well, you can listen to an audiobook while you're also washing the dishes or doing whatever, doing these manual tasks or driving, and that is still certainly a part of the audiobook experience for many people. But what was really interesting is that we were starting to see some trends towards people who just are sitting at home listening. And what I realized, especially in the pandemic, we've moved to so much screen time that being able to close your eyes and just get immersed in a story is so relaxing. So I think that we're seeing that as a part of the trend. It's a great way to it's a great way to both, be entertained, but also to learn and to engage in this content of story. And when I say story, I'm not just talking about fiction. I'm talking about nonfiction as well. I consider that all a part of the story.
Has there been times where you've taken, maybe you're producing an audio, perhaps even narrating an audiobook, as I know you have done many, many times before? Has there been times where you've taken on a project where at the forefront it didn't really seem like your cup of tea, and then ended up being, one of your favorite books that you've done that year? How often does something like that happen, that you just get immersed in fresh content that you otherwise wouldn't necessarily indulge in?
Yeah, it does happen. And are two projects in particular that I think about when you ask that question. Both of them were, I guess they would be categorized as thrillers. And I'm not somebody who really enjoys, watching or imagining horrific violence. Um, so I remember one of these was the Iguana Project by Dale Arden, and the opening scene was this brutal murder. And I thought, oh, this doesn't really feel like my cup of tea, right? But I ended up, we went ahead with it partly because I read further, and as I started to get into it, I was like really into the story. And by the time I got to the end with this really a twist that surprised even me, who has read a lot of stories, and I was like, oh, that is so awesome, just love that. And another was by Chris Shakowitz. Oh goodness, the title just slipped right out of my head, but Chris Shokowitz, and his also. As I read the story, and it was sort of dystopian and also not typically my cup of tea, but what I realized, especially when I read his dedication, like the note that he had at the very beginning of why he wrote this book and how he wanted to have an impact against the slaughter of whole races of people or, cultures, I realized, oh, okay, I see what he's doing now. And I ended up narrating that project as well. Yeah, that was another one that I got completely turned around.
Very nice. Tony, did you have a question that I so rudely cut off before the last one?
I was actually just going to ask, to what extent do you ever reshape a book to fit the audio world? I mean, when you described people sitting at home and listening, it's like having your own private storyteller, which in bygone ages only a king could hope to do, or a queen. But is there, as we're developing this process of storytelling, as we're learning a very old craft, is there ever any change between what worked fine on the written page but changes for the spoken page, if you will?
There are some things, and I touched on a couple of those, in considering what experience is a listener having. Are they, and we don't know, of course, but we have to make some assumptions that some people who are listening are going to be in a position where they can do a thing that we're asking them to do. This is especially in nonfiction, of course. And then there are going to be other listeners who are like ready to do it right now, whether it's a meditation or maybe it's a list of business questions or, it can be any number of things. So we are thinking about that and adding in instructions for what we want the listener to do. And I think that's really important because, if you get to a moment where you're told to do something, let's say, okay, I want you to think about these 3 things, right? And then you're supposed to think about those things. But what if this is not a good moment for you to be thinking about those things? Now, in the split second, I have to make a decision. Am I going to stop what I'm doing so that I can do the instruction? Or am I going to turn off the audio and come back to it later when I have time to think about it? More likely, so first of all, we've taken the person out of the experience while they're trying to make this decision. And then most often they're going to decide to turn off the audio and come back to it. Okay, so imagine yourself, next time you get in the car, you turn the audio back. Oh, no, I can't do that now. And now you've ended that experience with your audiobook when you might have really benefited from being able to get all the way through it. So when we create the experience of, if this is a moment, go ahead and do this. If it's not, you can skip ahead to the next track or, just think about it. Whatever's appropriate. So there are times, things like that, certainly. We will also look at things like if there are references to reading versus listening. Sometimes we don't have to change those, but sometimes it feels appropriate to. And so we will look at things like that. Yeah, I think those are the main things. But this is, we have had authors, especially in writing memoirs, who have said, and they're recording their own, this thing happened since I wrote the book. Can I add that in? Or can I add in this little anecdote? It's like, yes, absolutely. Why not? Because the audiobook does not have to be exactly the same as the text.
Well, and I'm just going to break in and say, and you are creating lots of work for literary researchers of the future who might want to compare the written form of this book and the audio form and say, it's interesting. Back in the old days, they did this. So that's fascinating. So thank you for walking us through that.
So we've split the best received and highest ranked audiobooks from 3 varieties of distribution. The big 5, small press and independent, of both fiction and non-fiction releases, and broken them down into their genres. Each book represented has their official rating score, which we then use to determine a winner. The higher the score, the closer the audiobook is to the top. But remember, as the months go by, every review, every reaction, however the book is received from either a critic or the general public, will change that score. So it's vital to keep coming back and checking on the placements in each category, as they will be ever changing. Now, notable mentions for me in the Awaa ranking list definitely starts with Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus, currently sitting at number 1 in literary fiction in the Big 5 group. It holds a score of 47.54 at the time of recording, and I was first made aware of this book from none other than Stanley Tucci, who recommended Lessons in Chemistry as his favorite book of this year. So that's an interesting bit of trivia for you. We also have Bryce Oakley's Nevermind sitting at a strong second place with a score of 45.47 at the time of recording. Nevermind is a part of the LGBTQ plus category under the indie group. Now, Becky, what books stick out to you this month?
I'm taking a look at The Last Rose of Shanghai, and I'm going to probably mangle the author's name, but I'm going to do my best. It looks like Wayna Di Randall. This is also literary fiction, and it's currently with a score of 45.13. This looks really interesting. It's from the electrifying jazz clubs to the impoverished streets of a city under siege. This is a story of love and redemption. So I'm looking forward to taking a look at that one, or listen, I should say. And then also Booth by Karen Joy Fowler, also literary fiction, and with a score of 44.13 right now. This this author is a best-selling author, and this really is like an epic and intimate novel about the family behind one of the most infamous figures in American history, John Wilkes Booth. So this should be really fascinating, sort of getting that story for what we are usually hearing just the other side.
Absolutely. They're great picks. Antony, have you got anything that sticks out to you?
Well, I'm looking at the field of history nonfiction, and earlier, Becky, you talked about how nonfiction and story do very much meld. I'm an Italian translator, and one thing I can point out is that in Italian, the word storia means both history and story. There is no distinction between the two in my chosen second language. I find that with nonfiction, it's always interesting to read about things you already know something about, or that you've lived the experience in some way. The first that I'm looking at is number 2 under history nonfiction, How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith. And it's about the Monticello plantation. I lived in, my family lived in Charlottesville for many years. And Monticello is right there on the hill overlooking Charlottesville. We've gone up there plenty of times. And it is an interesting place, a great paradox of American history, that Jefferson espoused freedom while enslaving 400 people. And so that book is of great interest to me. The third in history nonfiction is The Fabric of Civilization by Virginia Postral. And that's a history of fabric, of cloth. And I lived in Milan for many years, and that is a company town for the manufacture of fabric and all things made of it. So there, too, I'm really interested. But going down to number 5, I believe, and I didn't give the scores on those, the How the Word is Passed is 49.60, and the Fabric of Civilization is 47.55. But there is a book further down the list from small press. It is The Road to Eleusis by, there are 3 authors, G. Gordon Wasson, Albert Hoffman, and Carla Ruck. And it is about 3 experts, a mycologist, studies mushrooms, a chemist, and a historian, argue persuasively that the sacred potion given to the oracles in the course of the illusion rituals contained a psychoactive entheogen, a word I don't even know the meaning of. But the idea of psychedelics in world history is just fascinating. So all three of those books really strike me as interesting, and I'd love to listen to them.
Fantastic. There's really great picks, guys. Really great picks. To get access to the official ranking list, you can do so by visiting our website, Awaa.academy. We would also like to encourage you to sign up as a member. By doing so, you'll be able to cast your votes for your favorite audiobook titles, as well as many other membership benefits. It is completely free and very simple to join up. For more information on becoming a member, once again, head over to Awaa.academy. Antony, I know we're chomping at the bit to delve back into more audiobook talk with Becky. Is there anything else you'd like to know while we have the time?
Well, it's just been so great listening to her describe this world. Fascinating stuff. And in our conversation before we started the vidcast, you did mention your interest in audiobooks for kids. And I wonder if there's any audiobook for kids that you'd like to talk about in particular.
There's one that always kind of jumps to my mind right off the top of my head, and then there is a second one also that I will mention, but they have similar characteristics. One is for very young children, A Pie for a Pig by Susan Pace Cook. This is essentially, there is a set of pigs and a particular flavor of pie for each month of the year. And because each page has its own kind of flavor, literally, but also a flavor in terms of the sort of the either cultural or what I think of as musical flavor as well. Doing this book was really fun because each page had its own music that was appropriate for that. So we have, the key lime pie, mi sublime. And we have this sort of like, I'm not thinking of the right word, but, everything from Southern, U.S. Southern to Caribbean to British, all different flavors and accents, and all very piggy. So I got to do little pig snorts and squeals as well. The main thing when it comes, and this is why I mentioned this one, the main thing is, with a kid's book, we don't have the illustrations, obviously, but we have instead the opportunity to have a great soundscape. So I love working on books where there is reference to the sounds, or there is something about the words, the text, that give us that sense of where we are. Maybe we're outdoors in the neighborhood or in the woods and we can hear the birds, or we hear the stream. Maybe we're in a city and we hear that traffic and sirens. Whatever it is, having those sound effects is really a great enhancement and experience for the kids. The second title I just wanted to bring up is for kids who are a little bit older. And there was something so interesting about this project. It's The Swamp Mysteries by Elizabeth Hunt Singer. And it's for kids who are, about 8 to 10. And it's a spooky story taking place in the swamps of, down in like Louisiana or something. And as we built in these sound effects, some of which were, kind of scary sound effects, we had to then, as we sort of tested those out, we then had to gradually either pull some of those out because they were too scary, or, find a version that was maybe less realistic, or, just sort of pulled back on those feelings. Because, when you're creating these stories, you want your listeners fully involved and like right in the middle of it. But if you're creating a scary story for kids, you don't want them terrified. So it's a wonderfully written story, and highly recommended. But yeah.
Brilliant. I think I'm going to check out those recommendations myself. Um, we're going to be bringing you updates every month on the show, as well as interviews with the most amazing guests sharing their shared love of this wonderful medium. Once again, make sure to keep heading over to the official Academy rankings to witness the action firsthand ahead of the big night next year. For more information on what we do here at the Academy, head over to our website, awaa.academy. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, hitting that notification bell so you don't miss out on any future videos and episodes. Becky, it has been such a pleasure having you on this month's episode.
Thank you so much. It's been really fun, really, really lots of fun. And I'm so excited about, the Academy and all that's happening there. So thank you.
We're so excited to have you join us. It's been a real pleasure. Antony, have you enjoyed today's chat?
It has been fascinating. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Becky. It's been a delight. And I want to say that our next conversation will be with Marzia Lavinia Di Pietro, who I am looking forward to interviewing very much, as I think you are too, Johnny, right? And Becky, thank you again.
I'm sorry, I just have to throw in, because it's one of my favorite projects that we've worked on. Marzia was a part of, and that was the full cast project for Quantum, The Trilogy Begins.
Oh, goodness. Translated by someone I know.
Translated by Tony. Fantastic project. So
you mentioned that you really enjoyed that book, and it was a great book.
Fantastic. Well, I, for one, cannot wait for the next episode. And I've thoroughly enjoyed this one also. Another huge thank you to Becky Parker Geist for joining us on the show. And thank you to you for tuning in and making us a part of your day. We'll see you next time, and goodbye for now. Thank you so much, guys.